Good morning once again. This is your Prof. Zeus and this is lecture number 2 for income taxation. Okay? So we are going to continue our discussion really regarding taxation. So earlier we discussed some of the basic concepts of taxation. So let us continue the discussion. So the power to tax is the power by which independent state, like say for example the Philippines, through its lawmaking body like us in like our Congress, raises and accumulates revenue from its inhabitants. As I mentioned earlier, taxation is a form by which the state raises revenue for public use. Okay? So accumulates revenues from its inhabitants to pay the necessary expenses of the government. Okay? So again, government needs taxes in order for it to be able to pay off its expenditures. Okay? Be it expenditures or be it projects, they need money, okay? And the source of that money is really from taxes that we pay. Because, there are a lot of sources of tax in every government. We have different types of taxes and we'll discuss about that later on. Okay, next. Now, there are three inherent powers of the state, and one of which is the power of taxation, okay? Number 2 is what we call the police power, and the number 3 inherent power of the state is the eminent domain. Now, taxation, we've already discussed about that. No, they collect taxes from people as revenues, and these are being used for public purpose. Okay, police power naman, it is the inherent power of a sovereign state to legislate for the protection of health, general welfare, safety, and morals of the public. Okay, so again, the purpose of police power is for the protection of health, general welfare, safety, and morals of the public. Now, what is eminent domain? So when we speak of eminent domain, this is the inherent of a sovereign state to take private property. So when we speak of eminent domain, the state can take private property. Okay, so congratulations if you receive a letter from the government that your property is being taken by the government. Tama ba yun? Yes, because it is for use by the public. Okay, so to take private property for a public purpose. So there could be times when you will be asked to by the government to vacate a specific place. No, lalo na ngayon, marami tayong mga roads, maraming yung mga MRT, mga transportation that's being constructed. And there are times when yung iyong bahay ay dadaanan ng koneksyon ng LRT, ng MRT, no? And the government will ask you to give way because that will be for the benefit of greater majority. But of course, government will not just take away your property without proper compensation. Now, if you will be asked by the government to give up your property, then you will have to be properly compensated by the government. They will have to pay you. Now, the amount depending on the circumstances, of course. Okay? Now, let us try to identify or distinguish the differences between the three inherent power of the state. Okay? So, taxation, police power, and eminent domain. So number 1, for us to distinguish the three as to the purpose. So taxation, as we mentioned earlier, this is to raise revenue for the expenses of the state. So taxation is being done in order for the state to be able to raise the revenue to defray its projects and expenditures. Whereas police power, to promise the general welfare through regulations. So this is where Congress would come in, the police would come in for implementation or to ensure proper implementation of the laws. And then eminent domain is to facilitate the state's need for property for public use. So we speak of eminent domain. This is where government would take personal property, even personal property like land, okay, because of a project, okay. Who has been to Pulilan, Bulacan? Raise your hand. Oh, yung mga nasa Pulilan, Bulacan, for example, there was a bypass road that was constructed, no, that would take you from Pulilan to parts of Apalit, no, in like 15 minutes. Because without that road, that bypass road, it will take you about 30 to 45 minutes to go to a pallet. Okay? And it's, it's a vast tract of land na puro mga farm yun eh. So it was probably taken by the government, no? In order for them to build that access road. That's an example, a very good example of eminent domain. Okay? But again, if you will be asked to, to sacrifice a property, you should be properly compensated by the government. Okay? Now, as to the scope of taxation, when you speak of taxation, it applies to persons, property, rights, and privileges. No? So, taxation practically applies to almost all. Not only people, but also your property. Your property, your mom's property can be subject to taxation. Meron tayong tinatawag na real estate tax. Right? Meron tayong amelioration, tinatawag na amilyar every year that we have to pay. Okay? And then, for the police power, as to the scope, all persons, property, rights, privileges, and even liberties can be taken by government because of the police power. Now, eminent domain naman, only specific properties. Sabi ko nga sa inyo, di ba, nung say for example, dun sa Pulilan, syempre, kung sino lang yung may-ari ng mga tatamaan na lote, yung specific na property lang na yun. So for example, may lupa ka dun dadaan, yun lang dadaanan ng road ang kukunin ng government sa'yo. Okay? They will ask for it, but they will have to properly compensate you for it. As to number 3, transfer of property rights. Okay? So for taxation, taxes paid by the public or citizens become part of the public funds. It goes to our national treasury. Whatever taxes we pay goes to our national treasury because they need to account for that. And why? Because they also need to what? Subsidize, no? The operations of the different LGUs, of the different agencies of the government. So hindi lang basta sa national treasury yon. Lahat yun ay binabalik din nila, no? Binibigay nila sa different LGUs. Okay? Now, for the police power and property rights, no transfer but only restraint in the exercise of property rights. So wala naman, hindi ka naman kukunin o hindi ka naman kukunan when speak of police power. No? There's no transfer of property but only restrictions. Okay? And number 3, yung sa eminent domain naman, transfer talaga siya. So you have to transfer your property in favor of the state. Okay? So that's number 3. Okay. So those are some of the, ways on how we can distinguish the 3 inherent powers of the state. Again, the power to tax, police power, and power of eminent domain. Okay, so what is tax? So when you speak of tax, tax is an enforced proportional contribution. So again, let me try to emphasize. Enforced proportional contribution. Okay? From persons and property. So not only persons but also property levied by the state. So it is levied by the state to persons, properties, contribution, proportional contribution of persons. Okay? By virtue of its sovereign for the support of government and all public needs. Now remember this, guys. When you speak of taxes, remember that taxes is the lifeblood of every government. No government would exist without taxes, no? So parang kayo din. For example, pumapasok kayo sa eskwelahan. Can you study ng tama at maayos kung wala kayong support coming from your parents like in the form of allowances? Makakapag-aral ka ba kung kumakalamang sikmura mo? Di ba hindi naman? Okay, so yun. So you can in order for you to understand the importance of taxes, you can relate that to yourself. No? Ano ba yung nangyayari sa iyo? Because you yourself can be the government or can represent the government, and as the government, you collect money from your parents in the form of allowances. So without your allowance, can you still survive? Some would say yes, some would say no. Okay, so taxes is very important to support government expenditures. Okay, so without taxes, no government would exist and would be able to sustain its operations. Remember guys, yung mga sinabi ko kanina na uses of taxes. No, another use of tax is what? Payment of salaries of government employees. Remember that government is what? The single largest employer in every land, no? Like in the Philippines, ang dami nating mga government institutions, government offices, and all of the employees working in those government offices, from the executive like the Malacanang Palace, hindi lang si Presidente, but all other, even the cabinet members, they are employees of the government. And just imagine how many personnel are being employed by the government. It could run to 1 million. So no other big company can, or companies can afford to pay millions of employees, including the head of the state, of course. So ganun kalaki ang gastos ng gobyerno. Not to mention, of course, the different projects, no, that the government is pursuing or undertaking for the benefit of the public. Okay, so that is the definition of tax. Now, what are the essential characteristics of a tax? Number one, a tax is an enforced contribution. Okay, meaning once you get revenue, say as an employee, you cannot avoid tax. Okay, you cannot avoid tax. Number two, for raising revenue for public needs. Remember that taxes are being raised in order to support the expenses of the government, no? So like say for example, policemen are employees of the government, and their salaries are being paid from the contributions or taxes that we are paying to the government. Number three is proportionate in character. So what do we mean by proportionate in character? So the tax that you pay is essentially proportional to the revenue that you earn. So as your revenues go up, your taxes will also go up. Okay? Kaya yung mayayaman, mas malaki yung taxes na binabayaran kaysa sa mga middle class or even sa mga low class income. Okay? Number three, it is payable in money. The very essence of taxation, syempre, gusto makakolekta ng government ng taxes or ng money because it has some expenditures that it has to also take care of. So taxes are payable in money. Now, imposed within the state's jurisdiction. So, the state cannot tax somebody in other country. Okay, dapat kung yung ating taxation is limited to our territory. We cannot tax people or even businesses outside our country. Okay, so yun lang. It is imposed within the jurisdiction of the state. And of course, it is personal to the taxpayer. So if you are an employee, your tax is personal to you. If you have a business, the tax is also personal to the business. Business has to pay its own taxes, no? Now, what are the principles of tax? We have 4. It is number 1, proportional to one's ability to pay. So as I mentioned earlier, if you are earning more, then it is expected that you will be paying more. Okay? Number 2, it is certain. So as long as you are earning revenue, it is certain that you have to pay tax. Although there are some exceptions, of course, like in the train law, aside from what we call the minimum wage earner, we also have those people earning 250,000 pesos and less as exempted from income taxation. But those are specifically provided for, okay, in the laws. Number 3, convenient to pay. So the taxpayer, okay, should be able to pay it anytime, anywhere, no? Although sa atin kasi we have what we call yung accredited authorized bank. So if you are, for example, registered as a taxpayer in one RDO, you have to find out how you can pay taxes, no? And where do you pay taxes? So sino ba yung mga accredited local banks that can accept your payment of taxes? Okay? Very specific yan. So what will happen, say for example, you are a registered taxpayer of one RDO and you file your taxes and paid your taxes sa bangko na hindi naman accredited nung RDO na yon. You will be penalized because of the wrong venue, no? Nag-file ka dun sa, o nagbayad ka dun sa agent na hindi naman accredited nung RDO mo. Okay, kaya we have to be very, very careful in filing and paying our taxes because wrong move, wrong venue, that could lead to tawag dito penalties no being imposed by the state on you as a taxpayer. Okay, so those are the principles of taxation. Now, we will again I'll meet you later for the third lecture for this subject, income taxation. Okay? Thank you and bye-bye.